I'm so excited. It's that time of the year again. The English Premier League is back, but this time there is a major character missing from this year's lineup. Pep Guardiola might just be the most successful manager of the last 20 years. Since Sir Alex Ferguson at Manchester United, nobody has been more dominant in English football. And yes, he had enormous financial backing at Manchester City, but he still had to make it happen on the field. 6 Premier League titles, 2 FA Cups, 4 League Cups, and finally in 2023, the Champions League as part of that historic treble for Man City. And just like in any sport, winning makes for good business because over those 10 years, Manchester City didn't just win. The club became bigger, more valuable and more influential. It attracted some of the world's best players and established itself at the very top of world football. And City had the money and the ambition before Pep arrived, but how much of what Manchester City has become is because of Pep Guardiola? And now that he's gone, we're about to find out what happens without him. Let's get into it, because if you want to know what's really going on in sport, you got to follow the money.
And now it's time.
It's time!
It's time for
Moneyball.
Moneyball.
Are you familiar with the story of Moneyball?
Welcome to Moneyball, the business of sport. This is the show for sports insiders and for fans that want to know what is really going on in the game. I'm your host, Scott Keenan, and if you like the show, please subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Now, as a Manchester United fan who has lived and worked in Manchester, it's been impossible to ignore the rise of Manchester City since 2008 under new ownership and under Pep Guardiola for the last 10 years. And now he's gone. What does it mean for the team that has won the most in the last decade than anybody else? Well, there aren't many better people placed to help me answer this question today than Ben Ransom from Sky Sports in the UK. He is a good mate of mine, and he's based in the north there, where he's covered City closely for a very long time, including countless press conferences with the great man, live crosses and one-on-one interviews with Pep Guardiola too. Ben, a big welcome to Moneyball.
Thanks for having me, Scott.
It's nice to see you.
It's been forever, hasn't it? I know we chat, but time zones are more problematic than you'd think, even in this world of video calls and WhatsApps. It's so it's great to see your beautiful, bouncing, smiling face this morning.
Thanks, mate. Well, let's get back in. Let's get into it. Take me back to 2008. Why did Sheikh Mansour buy Man City at the time, and what exactly had he bought?
Yeah, well, I mean, the first thing to point out is you were here back then, working in the UK. That's obviously where we met. Before that, City they'd been through a lot of ups and downs, hadn't they, if you remember? And the fans were kind of long-suffering. You'll remember better than most, at Old Trafford, they used to have that banner, didn't they, talking about years since, like, you know, Liverpool won trophies, City won trophies, that kind of thing. So they were very much in the doldrums. Then they'd had this false dawn. A guy called Thaksin Shinawatra had taken over. He had a lot of political sway, certainly in Thailand, and some business dealings that didn't necessarily hold up to scrutiny since as well. But he took over for a while and they pumped a bit of money in, and there was a little bit of a false dawn. That didn't really work. And then, out of the blue, really, Abu Dhabi, and I have to be careful here because obviously the club very clear to point out they're not owned by the nation state of Abu Dhabi, but essentially all the money comes from the nation state of Abu Dhabi. They took over the club, and at the time Mark Hughes was manager. It was pretty much deal done on deadline day. Robinho signed, if you remember. There were crazy scenes outside the Etihad. There was all the breaking news lines on Sky about being like the richest club in the world.
So I remember this. So, and working there as a journo with you, a couple of times I did get to go to Mark Hughes' press conferences at City, and it was a dicey time. I remember that pretty clearly. And that signing was huge. So Brazilian star Robinho from Real Madrid signed on deadline day. I think at the time it was a record around £32 million. It was a big statement of intent from the club, wasn't it?
It really was. I mean, this was basically, they had 24 hours, didn't they, to try and spend some of the riches. Now, these also, just to put this in context, these were the days before these much, much stricter rules about what clubs can spend, either whether you call it FFP, PSR, whatever you want to call it. So this was an opportunity for a a football club like Man City just to throw their riches at it and move themselves up the league. Now, it's easier said than done. They started with this group, then they were able to spend again through that season in the summer. So then Tevez came. That was, I think you were still here, weren't you, for Welcome to Manchester?
Yes.
The big poster. It was kind of famous, right in the middle of the
Piccadilly,
city
wasn't
centre. Yeah,
Near the train station.
Yeah, exactly that. They'd stuck a big poster up that had Carlos Tevez's face, Welcome to Manchester. And it was obviously a couple of fingers up across the city to Rivals United. And
Yeah, because that's where he'd come from, right?
Exactly. Fergie called them the noisy neighbours. It was great in that sense because suddenly the upstarts were starting to bloody a few noses. But on the pitch, for Mark Hughes, certainly, it just never quite clicked. Now, I've got a bit of admiration for Hughes because what he tried to do, he tried to make a team that was going to play amazing football because essentially he's just been told blank checkbook, create the best football team you possibly can. He tried to build a team that just played kind of swashbuckling football because I guess it was the closest we've seen previously was probably the Kevin Keegan Newcastle era, where he just tried to throw pieces at it and make a really exciting team. But obviously they left themselves vulnerable and ultimately it just didn't really work. So
this is starting to sound like Ange Postecoglou to me.
It's a bit like Ange Postecoglou. It's exactly that kind of thing. It didn't work. They had a good European run. And ultimately, I think what happened was the ownership group, they kind of got their feet under the table. They looked at what they had and kind of where they needed to go. And I think they felt that probably Mark Hughes wasn't the manager to take them there.
So let's move forward then to 2016 because that's when Pep arrived. What happened during those 8 years, to turn City from a club, that was kind of getting money in the door, but to become a club that was capable of attracting arguably the best manager in the world?
Well, a few things happened. They recruited quite sensibly by that point. So they threw all this money at it under kind of Hughes, and that didn't work. So then what they did was they thought, okay, well, what's the missing piece? A manager. So they went from Mark Hughes to Roberto Mancini. Mancini came in and essentially had the basis there, as you can tell, of a really good squad. I mean, look, Vincent Kompany is a City legend for everything he achieved. Yep. So he was in the door, great leader. But what they did, rather than go for kind of players like Robinho, who were, what were they, kind of top European talent, world-class type potential players. They went for players that were just the next level above them in the Premier League. Gareth Barry, Bob on, straight in that bracket. Kolo Touré. They brought in Patrick Vieira, a bit of experience. They also brought in a guy called David Silva a year or so later, and he, again, was basically the instrument that transformed what City were in terms of a team that on their day could beat anyone to a team that consistently could beat anyone. And it changed probably in the summer of 2011 when they won the FA Cup. So it was their first trophy in 30-odd years. Mancini, obviously, had driven this team now to a point where they could win trophies. And the following year, they won the most dramatic Premier League title race we've probably ever seen because of that final day, Aguero's goal, and that really set the standard for this new City, I suppose.
Clubs that he'd come from, Barcelona and Bayern Munich, two of the biggest clubs in Europe, and you go back 10 years prior, there's no way Manchester City would be on the list of clubs that he would want to go to next. And so obviously there's money there and they've built a playing squad that was able to compete and contest at that level. When Pep came to the club, did he make Manchester City a bigger club, or do you think Manchester City's money and ambition made him bigger?
A bit of both, probably. Now, the context of Pep arriving as well has to be looked at here because we've spoken about the on-pitch stuff. So they started winning trophies. They had players, as you say, that were part of this bedrock, literally Aguero, Kompany, Silva, etc. Behind the scenes is the crucial part in terms of getting Pep, because Pep's former teammate at Barcelona, a fella called Sheikh Mansour, who played with Pep back in the kind of late 80s, early 90s at Barca, had gone on to become one of the execs at Barcelona. Him, alongside a guy called Ferran Soriano, had come over to Manchester City to work for the new regime. Right. So essentially, from the time they arrived, in that period I'm talking about between kind of, Mancini and Pep arriving, they were laying the foundation to get Pep. The whole plan was built around getting Pep. They realised he was the best manager. By that time, he'd left Barcelona after everything he'd achieved there. So there wasn't that problem of getting him out of his boyhood club. He'd gone to Bayern Munich. He did pretty well, but never won the Champions League. That was his big regret there. And then there was essentially just a period where they were planning when they'd be able to get him. Now, obviously, when he was at Bayern Munich, they couldn't. So when Mancini left, they brought in Manuel Pellegrini. He did pretty well, won a league title, but still it was for Pep. The whole training ground was designed for Pep. The pieces were there for him. So when they were finally able to get him in the summer of 2016, that was essentially the final piece in the takeover plan. So they built the club, they built the training ground, they got the manager. And you're right in what you say, though. Pep would not have come had City not been towards the top of English football, had they not been challenging for the major trophies. He's never going to do that. But it was all there for him. His mates were essentially running the club on the ground. And it's easy to say now, but the rest does feel like history because in terms of a plan, it was pretty perfect.
What changed then when he arrived? What do you remember from that time?
That first season was actually really difficult. I don't know if you remember how bad it was, but at times it was tricky. He came with his style. We'd just seen what he'd done. Barcelona was the one that sticks in my mind. I mean, I was lucky enough to see them play in the Champions League final in 2009 when they played Manchester United off the park in Rome. They did it in 2012, didn't they? A couple of years later. So I saw Pep's Champions League win there. He did it back at Wembley. He had created the best football team, one of the best we'd ever seen for sure. Stylistically, they were levels above any other side, particularly the Premier League. So he brought that with him. And it was his way or the highway, essentially. And he made that very clear in his first season. There were games where it wasn't working. The players he had, as good as a lot of them were not able to carry out that style. One of the big things that happened when he first came, you might remember Joe Hart, England goalkeeper. He'd won two or three league titles, league titles with City.
Yeah.
Binned off, absolutely bombed out before he'd even had a chance. Pep essentially came in and said, "You're never going to be able to play the way I want my goalkeeper to play."
And that was pretty controversial at the time, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was ruthless because he was England's number one. So everyone's looking around going, wow. And then he brought in Claudio Bravo, who was pretty poor. But Pep decided he wanted a goalkeeper that could play with his feet to a certain level. He obviously decided he'd trade that for everything Joe Hart had brought. So decisions like that, he came in and he was ruthless. So you can imagine the press were a little bit like, okay, well, you've come in with your kind of, your attitude and we've seen what you've built before, but this is the Premier League and we're not sure you can do that. So many questions in those press conferences for the first few months were all about his style. Would he ever change? Could it work in the Premier League? Did he doubt himself? And
this is starting to sound like Ruben Amorim at Manchester United.
Yeah, I will say a lot of the same journalists were asking those questions because a lot of the Manchester United journalists, of course, would cover both clubs, especially when Pep came because he was box office. So exactly that. And he just batted them all away. I'll never change. This is my style. There's one press conference where he sits there and he looks at all the journalists and he kind of goes, he basically starts going, 21 trophies or something like that. 21 trophies in 3 years, 5 years, 6, whatever he was saying. He's going 1, 2, 3. He was so good. He was basically saying, the proof is in the pudding. I've done this, I've achieved, and I will achieve. So the first season was tricky. I think they finished fourth. Again, my memory might be playing tricks on me. It may have been third. But anyway, they just about got in the Champions League, but they didn't come close to winning the title. Then came the summer rebuild where he, by that point, realised exactly what he needed. And the next year was the best City I've probably ever seen when they got 100 points. That shirt there is from that season. Pep signed it for me. It is a shot on my wall. Champions 2018. It's 100 points, more goals than anyone had ever scored, more points than anyone had ever delivered in the Premier League. It was an unbelievable season. And yeah, that's all on Pep. The one thing I will say about having worked closely watching Pep for such a long time, he's by his own admission a bit of an overthinker. We've seen him in big games do crazy things. He is always obsessing over his style, what his teams are doing, how he can improve, what he can tweak, what he can change. Sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes there's been games where you've seen him try something and within 45 minutes, he's basically, you can imagine, he's been thinking about this all week and he's just throwing his notes on the floor and going, okay, go back to whatever. But he's always wanting to improve and he's so self-critical because of that. He realizes the standards he has to set. So you're right, that first season would have been very, very tricky. He would have thought about things a lot when they weren't working. the backing, I think, then of Ferran Soriano and Shiki Begiristain above him would have been absolutely crucial, because some other clubs, not all, but some, would have gone, this is a project, this is a step too far, we're not ready for this. We won the title a couple of years ago, we're nowhere near it now, let's change. But they didn't. They stuck with him. They backed him in the transfer market, as I say, in the summer of 2017. And as out of that came the legacy.
And I think, that success, bred success. And, we think about Manchester City now, a lot of people probably think of Erling Haaland. He's such a big character. He's huge in social media. He's got this incredible charisma, which I love. And he, was on display during the World Cup. But I wonder, what do you think about the brand of Manchester City? I kind of look back and there's been so many great players over the last 10 years, but probably the overriding personality and face that's associated with the club, it's not one of the players, it's Pep.
I think you're right. I think it is Pep, but that shows the level he's at. I mean, in my mind, he's the best manager in European football that I've seen. Now, that's not taken away from Sir Alex Ferguson's achievements, because Fergie, in a very different way, was an incredible manager, an incredible leader. Of course he was. I mean, I got to watch that firsthand as well. But tactically, Pep was better. Fergie was a great man manager. He led the team very well. Him and David Gill recruited so smartly for Manchester United. But they always had a slight advantage in that when they were on top, they had more revenue than everyone else. There weren't as many teams in the Champions League. Competition just wasn't as fierce. And they were able to just go and pick off the best player. I mean, Van Persie, Rooney, whoever it was in the Premier League, and elevate themselves. Pep created a style, and he reinvented that style three times in his period at City. And yes, he had millions and millions, billions of pounds to spend, right? Without that, by his own admission, he would never have won the trophies he did. He always says, money, the players. Now, partially that's tongue-in-cheek and partially it's not, because he recognises to win at the elite level, you need that. You mentioned Erling Haaland. Without the finances to offer him the wage packet to bring him in and attract him to City, he's never playing for Manchester City. He's never helping them win the treble in 2023. It's not happening. So that's a massive part of it. But what they've done very smartly, City, to be fair to them, they have grown their revenues off the pitch to keep up with the football club. And we see lots of teams now trying to break into the Champions League. And I'm thinking the likes of Villa and Newcastle particularly. Both have wealthy owners. Both have been in the Champions League in and out for the last few seasons. But they've got no money to spend because they can't consistently raise the revenues of everything about the club. City's academy is akin to Chelsea's. They trade so well out of that. It's a massive, it basically just injects so much cash into the first team and into the club, which allows them to go and spend big like they've done again this summer. So they built the club off the pitch alongside Pep. But of course, having Pep as the figurehead meant that they could command the respect, particularly in European football, that other clubs have failed to be able to live up to.
You got a lot closer to Pep than most journalists. Working at Sky Sport, you had the right to talk to him one-on-one, and you did that regularly over a long period. What was he actually like in those interactions with you?
It was really interesting, actually, because he, one of the last things he said to us when he left, it was really strange because for 10 years you felt like he'd kept everyone at arm's length. And it was the same in those interviews that you can imagine what happens. We have, let's say, a 15-minute slot. We're sat in a little room half the size of this, lights, camera set up. We literally run down the stairs from the media room after the press conference to be there ready for him, because we're literally told by the press team that you can't keep him waiting. He wants to get back. He's got things to do. And he is. He's always wants to be back on the training pitch. And he would come in. There'd be handshakes for everybody. Oh, no. And he'd sit down and go, here, yeah. And he'd go, Mike, kind of as quick as he could. And maybe in that time of him getting mic'd up, you had a minute while the cameraman's setting and it's making sure the shot's all right and that kind of thing, just to have a little bit of small talk. And I always found it so awkward because what do you say to Pep Guardiola? Well,
did he ever ask you a question? Did he ever ask about you?
Yes, once or twice. I think he'd been burnt before by other journalists at different points. I think he wanted to keep that distance with the journalists. And right at the end of his final press conference, I mean, it felt like the long goodbye, actually, because I said goodbye to about 4 times. I did an interview, we did a press conference, we did a post-match press conference.
He's like, you again.
Exactly. We gave him a bottle of wine, all sorts. But after the final press conference before the final game, when obviously it all come out he was going, he took us all into one of the boardrooms and we had a glass of champagne. And it was nice just for the first time in 10 years to see him actually not wanting to be rushing out of the room. He was happy to stand and spend 5-10 minutes chatting with everyone individually. I mean, like not 5-10 minutes and gone. He'd have little conversations with people. I won't reveal what we spoke about. Well, we had quite a candid chat about something going on in the world. And he was really honest, and it was nice to chat to him in that moment. And there was a bit of warmth there. And he said to us all, he said, look, I purposefully came here with a strategy not to get close to any of you. So I'm sorry if it's felt like I've kind of been iced you out almost, but I didn't want to essentially affect your writing. I wanted you to be autonomous and write as you might want to, without bias, without loyalties. So it was a good answer. I'm not sure that that's strictly true, but also it was a nice way for him to say, look, I do appreciate what we had here. I appreciate the time I've spent here. I'm not a bad guy, really. Off I go into the sunset.
What's the lasting attribute that kind of sticks in your mind about him as a person?
Yeah, I think that he changed a lot, I think, while he was there. But I think I definitely saw humanity to him in the last couple of years. And he showed it more to his players too, I think. I think there was much more of an understanding about what it was to play for him and how his players had to deal with being out of the team for whatever reason, sit on the bench, work hard every day in training and never get an opportunity because he had his favourites or a certain style, or he might dig them out in a press conference in quite a ruthless way. But I got the sense he was better at handling that situation the longer he was in it. So I think he does actually leave a much more rounded human than when he arrived, for all manner of reasons. And in a football sense, I just think he's tactically brilliant. I've loved watching his football teams develop over the last few years. And the fact that so many managers now you can see try and either emulate his style or elements of his style shows the impact he had.
Oh, it was absolutely massive. I mean, looking from the outside in, and it's so insightful hearing you talk about it in that way. You've had that closeness that most of us never get. The word that jumps to my mind is intensity. But of course, like you say, there was ebbs and flows in the way that he was as a manager over those years. There were good times and bad. There was a lot of winning though, and if winning is good business, what's the risk to City when someone as successful as Pep leaves? Do you think Manchester City as a machine now is big enough to just keep going?
They feel they are. I've spoken to a lot of people around the club because obviously this has been the most significant change at the club in a decade, with Enzo Maresca coming in and the way that appointment happened and Pep leaving. They feel the club's in a good place. They feel that Pep did everything that they dreamed of and more. I mean, the fact no one expected him to be there for 10 years. I mean, he did basically 4 years at Barcelona, 3 years at Bayern Munich, 10 years at Manchester City. Seems crazy, but
especially with his style of management, the type of person he was, the intensity at which he performed.
Exactly. And that kind of goes back to what I was saying about him. He must have learned a lot about himself in those periods when he had to evolve that team, because there's a lot of soul searching has to be done and a lot of mistakes, obviously, but to be consistently successful and deliver, it takes being able to put all those pieces in the jigsaw and lay it out and redo it, doesn't it? So he did that really, really well. But City are confident because they had a bit of a handover. Sheikh Mansour left a year before Pep, essentially, but there was a long handover period. I do think part of Pep staying on was to manage that. I do. I mean, he's never said it, but I think he probably was thinking, look, we can't, a bit like United. When Fergie and Gill left in that summer, United haven't recovered. They haven't won a title since. It's been 13 years and they haven't come close. And behind the scenes, United are as much of a mess, or have been, as on the pitch. Well, for City, they'd seen all this play out. They want to avoid that at all costs. So I think Pep stayed an extra year or two to manage that transition.
And was his role, mate? Was he just the team manager, or there's obviously the City group with the 8 or 9 other clubs around the world. Did he have a bigger role there, or is there a machine that kind of sits outside of the Manchester City Premier League team that kind of keeps all this going?
Yeah, essentially there is. I mean, look, there will be some crossover. I mean, Khaldoon Al Mubarak, the City chairman, obviously will be heavily involved. you would have got some of Shiki Bigiristan, Ferran Soriano, those kind of people. Omar Barada before that would have been involved in the CFG. But largely the Man City first team sits separate, and Pep was able to concentrate on what he had to do to make that team a success, because ultimately I think the group felt that Pep's the figurehead in terms of the football stuff. Now, that's not to say that those coaches couldn't come and spend time at City. I mean, Ange Postecoglou is a great example, isn't it? I mean, when he was over at Yokohama, he came over and spent a bit of time watching Pep and obviously got to speak to him and see him and stuff. So there is that opportunity for development, but really it's about process and then other parts of the group being able to look at what Pep did and go, okay, we'll just replicate, which is, without his input. So yes, he's been a figurehead for so much. But I think that off-field transition for City particularly, they've still got Khaldoon, who now commands respect in every boardroom in Europe. Khaldoon Al-Mubarak and now Hugo Viana is coming as the sporting director as part of this transition. They are very smart at making sure they can still be influential in European football and get, it helps get deals done, doesn't it? So that's an important part of the club. That's why I think they'll carry on. And in Enzo Maresca, they've identified someone who's worked under Pep, who's worked as part of the City football system, so understands the club when it's winning to come back in. And I think actually it's quite an astute appointment, to be honest, on that front.
Yeah, and time will tell, right? It's interesting when you take away someone who is the figurehead, who is so successful, and who is, winning is their thing. It is going to be hard to fill that void. How big a hole, though, does Pep actually leave? What do you think is sort of the hardest thing to replace? Is it, literally a manager, one in, one out? Is it his ability to attract players? Is it his winning mentality? What do you think is the biggest sort of hole that he leaves in Man City that Maresca and the people around him are going to have to fill?
It's got to be the winning mentality and the proven track record of winning, hasn't it? It's got to be, because Maresca, as much as he's done pretty well at his previous clubs, he's relatively inexperienced. A Club World Cup with Chelsea, Conference League title, which they always should have won, and the Championship with Leicester, of course, when he got promoted. I mean, yes, they are trophies, but City will demand a consistency from him over the next few years that demands they either win or challenge for the Premier League. They have to win major domestic trophies. They've got to be in and around the Champions League too. So, yeah, that experience of winning, I think, for Pep, it will be really hard to replace.
And the aura, right? Like that aura that he had.
Yeah, and for Maresca personally, I think his biggest challenge will come. Right now we're in the honeymoon period. He's done one press conference in Manchester. It was all smiles, jokes, etc. He's done a couple on tour. If he has a first season, I don't think he will, but if he has a first season like Pep's first season where he's struggling, I can see that mask slipping very quickly. So that his challenge will be managing those relationships and also filling the void, because I know we'll probably get onto it, but Pep has been the public face of Manchester City for a decade. And in the time that I've been there, that's involved a couple of racism storms around players. It's involved transfers that fell through at the last minute. It's involved it's involved the charges. The Premier League charges has been a topic for 3 years. Like, we've had, more than 100 charges levelled at the club. An independent investigation, still don't have the results of. But Pep's been the only person from Manchester City to sit there and face public or media scrutiny on that. No one else sits there. The chairman doesn't come out and do interviews with us, or the chief execs or anything.
Why is that? Why was he put forward? And now there's that void, right? So it's either Enzo Maresca's got to step up and learn to be able to handle those big issues, or somebody else in the club needs to step up. Why was Pep the only one talking about that issue?
Yeah, because he was the only one that we could talk to. It's literally that. Now, Pep could have sat there and said, it's not for me to talk about, there will be other managers. I can think of quite a few in the Premier League who literally don't talk about anything other than, well, sometimes they don't do team news, let alone anything else. They don't want to talk about anything. Whereas Pep, to be fair, had enough self-confidence. And I think he recognised his role. He had to be the figurehead and the statesman. And he also realised, quite smartly actually, that the questions weren't going to go away. If he doesn't sit there in a press conference and, as he did, go, I believe in the club. They've told me they've done nothing wrong. We are going to be exonerated by this investigation and come out on the front foot. The next week and the next week and the next week and the next week, it's the same question. Whereas once he'd put that out there, he then has a position, doesn't he? So every time we ask him about it or he gets asked in a different way about it, whether it's going to tarnish his legacy or anything, he can be quite forthright about it. And he can say, well, until everything's proven negatively, there's no damage. And actually, I've been told everything's going to be great. And, he is the PR face. I don't know why clubs, and City are just one of those clubs that don't ever put anyone up for interview. Like in terms of their execs, they do like an in-house yearly briefing with the chairman, Khaldoon Al-Mubarak, which gets kind of syndicated around. It's done by a journalist, but it's done inside the club. Obviously, they've signed off every single sentence of that. It just is what it is.
You see it in a lot of sports. You see it in Aussie sports here as well, mate, where there's, often the coach or the manager is the face of the club and they are the ones. I mean, especially, in European football, I mean, they're doing 3 press conferences a week, sometimes more when they've got European football, FA Cup, League Cup, league matches. It's kind of wild how often they get put up and they have to deal with all of these things. And I think you're right, Pep did front foot a lot of this stuff. And if he hadn't, there would have been more and more questions from people like you every week. How much did the issue around these unresolved charges about financial fair play with Man City, in your opinion, tarnish his legacy, or at least be a factor in how people think about what he did there? Given there was a couple of years overlap between when he arrived and when these charges kind of relate to.
Yeah, it's hard to say because we've all seen the leaked emails that were leaked by Der Spiegel. That was the original investigation, wasn't it? Now they were obviously, and City point this out repeatedly, they were obtained in an illegal fashion. It was essentially a Portuguese hacker, hacked into club emails, got a load of content, gave them to this German publication, Der Spiegel, which is where a lot of the allegations of wrongdoing come from in terms of basically a lot of it stems from artificially inflating sponsorship deals to pump more money into the club. Now, obviously, if Etihad, who are owned by Abu Dhabi, and Man City, who are owned by Abu Dhabi, are kind of sharing money, then you can get around a lot of financial fair play rules, because obviously you can say a certain amount of money is coming to the club, whether it comes from the actual company or whether it comes from above. Now, that's what, in theory, this investigation is going to try and prove either way, whether it did happen or it didn't. So that's the background of the charges, and the fact that we're still no nearer resolution. We're 3 years on from the Premier League announcing they were investigating. Before that, we had the UEFA one where City were found guilty of some wrongdoing. You've got to be clear about that. But essentially, they didn't really get any punishment because a lot of the charges were time barred, i.e. they couldn't go back far enough in the accounts to say this or that didn't happen, but they didn't have jurisdiction over that. And they essentially took a suspended sentence and a bit of a fine, and we won't do it again. Well, they obviously don't need to do it again because the club's making record revenue. So if they did do that, then we're at a different stage now. But in terms of this going on in the background, it is always going to be a cloud because it's affected how the club has been run behind the scenes. All clubs want to be seen to be kind of winning on sporting merit. But look, this whole podcast is about the business of football and the business of sport. Well, sport is intrinsically linked to big business and everything else we see in the world. So of course, people are going to be looking for advantages or ways around things. Your accountant's saying, right, Scott, put your money into this and this will save you a bit of tax there. I don't know.
That was an off mic conversation, mate. I didn't want to bring that into the podcast.
What's the name of your accountant again? I could do with one. No, jokes aside, obviously. It's a murky world, big business, of course it is.
You've covered football for so long now and you've covered Pep's City up close. If we go forward, say, another 20 years and you look back at this time, what do you think people will remember and what will you remember most about the difference that Pep made at City?
I think it's the football for me. It is.
He changed English football, didn't he?
He has changed English football in so many ways. I mean, watch any game in the Premier League when it starts again, and I guarantee you'll see in every match something that Pep brought in, whether it be goalkeeper inviting pressure, trying to play out from the back with his feet, whether it be a fullback moving into midfield and playing as a pivot, whether it be 4 players stood across the front of the area, all looking to press and box teams in and win the ball high up the pitch, whether it be people receiving passes in really tight areas and rather than panic, just hold onto the ball, find another pass and playing their way out of situations. There are so many elements to Pep's game, which Pep, will openly admit a lot of it came from Johan Cruyff, his mentor. But it has changed English football. There's no doubt about it. And I was talking about the Premier League, but I think the biggest thing for me is the fact you go down not just the football leagues, into non-league, and teams are doing the same thing. And that is utterly remarkable.
Mate, I want to finish up with this question for you. Do you reckon the ultimate test of this kind of Manchester City project, which is now, nearly 20 years old, is the ultimate test what happens now that Pep's leaving?
Yeah, it's the first time they haven't had a plan. And when I say a plan, the plan ended, didn't it, with Pep and I suppose winning the Champions League. When they took over Abu Dhabi and Sheikh Mansour, we want to become a dominant force in the Premier League. We want to build a club that attracts Pep Guardiola and we want him to deliver the Champions League. Well, they did all of that and more. So this is the first time the club's going into the next stage of the plan. Now, no one's actually vocalised what that plan is. I'd imagine it's just a sustained success. I would imagine they'd probably quite like another Champions League trophy to sit in the cabinet. I'd imagine they will also just want to manage this post-Pep era because it's always going to be a challenge. But yeah, it's really fascinating actually to know where the club is going to go next. I think off the pitch, they are in a very, very healthy place. As it stands, they're making record revenues. As I said right at the start, the academy is generating so much resource. They either have players that knock on the door of the first team and are breaking their way in, or they sell them off for tens of millions of pounds. So it's, in that sense, it's quite an impressive model. And I don't see them going away.
What do you reckon your first question is going to be to the new manager, Enzo Maresca, when you get to sit down with him one-on-one?
I think I'd really like to know from him what he feels about the differences he has with Pep Guardiola. Because he'll be asked so many questions about Pep's style, Pep did this, you're doing this, whatever. I'd love to know from him how he sees that. He's obviously very deferential to Pep. He respects him a lot. He's learned a lot from him. Very complimentary. He thinks he's the best manager. But I'd love to get a sense of, okay, but there's Park Pep. What about Maresca? What's different about Maresca? And I think we'll see it in his teams, I'm sure. But I'd love to know how he feels about that.
Yeah, and look, my first question would be, I reckon if I was in your shoes, are you ready? Because the onslaught is coming. Everyone's going to be watching and he will be taking questions left, right and centre. I reckon for the first 6 months, it'll be like drinking out of a fire hose. Like he'll just be under the pump. And look, he might do well and he might love that environment, but that's what's coming for him. How about you, mate? Are you looking forward to the football? It's not far away now. Are you excited?
Yeah, I've recovered from the World Cup and everything that went on. So, yeah, I'm actually quite looking forward to it now. What I like about the Premier League this season, talking specifically about that, is how open it could be because there's so much change. I love the fact that we've got a load of new managers at big clubs. I love the fact there's been some quite high profile transfers, I like the fact that there's a resurgent United that might challenge. I like the fact that there's uncertainty around some of the big clubs too. I think it could be really exciting.
Mate, I just want to get a couple of predictions from you then before we go. Do you have an idea who you think could win this year?
It might sound stupid, but I actually think City might win it.
Yeah, wow.
Which is, I know that sounds ridiculous, but I look at the team and I look at what Maresca's trying to do with the team. If he starts from the base that he has done before and makes them solid defensively, which I think that'll be his priority, even if they lose Rodri, which they probably will, if they could bring in Buadi and another central midfielder, there's a chance they get Enzo Fernandez even, but they've got Elliot Anderson, who's a great signing. There's a lot of stability. Haaland is going to score another bucket load of goals, assuming he stays fit.
For sure.
And his style you mentioned that style of Pep's early years where you saw the wingers bombing around the outside. Well, he wants his wingers to stay high and wide, and I think that'll be quite exciting. And I think that has the ingredients of a team that could win it. It's a massive ask for Arsenal, I think, to do it again, but they're probably the closest challenge.
Well, mate, I can't wait to watch it. It's exciting. The Premier League is on its way again. We watch it here on Stan. We can check you out on Sky Sports if you're watching in the UK. I'm hoping United, but we'll see how Carrick goes this year, mate. I'm still hoping. Mate, it was really great talking to you. Thanks so much for your time, and enjoy the Premier League season ahead.
Oh, Scott, it's been an absolute pleasure to catch up, mate. I will be watching United's fortunes, of course, eagerly. I don't think you'll win it, though, mate.
Mate, I'll cross everything and just hope for some good football over the next 9 months. Thanks, mate.
Moneyball.
You know, I think the next few years are going to be so interesting at Manchester City because for almost 2 decades, there was a pretty clear plan. Build the club and the infrastructure, get the best people, and then get Pep Guardiola, which they did, and then go after the Champions League, and they did that too. They did all of it. And along the way, Pep became more than just the manager. As Ben said, he was the face of the club. He helped attract some of the best players in the world, and his influence, it's actually changed the way that football has been played in England over the last decade. But maybe the ultimate measure of what they built together comes now, because if City can keep winning without Pep, then maybe his greatest legacy is helping to build a club that no longer needs him. And if they can't, well, we might just discover just how valuable Pep Guardiola truly was. Another big thanks to Ben for joining us here on Moneyball. Really great chat. Love speaking with him and to connect again on the show here, mate. Now, if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on YouTube or follow Moneyball wherever you get your podcasts. And until next time, thank you for watching and listening. And remember, if you want to know what's really going on in sport, you've got to follow the money. I'll see you next time.